Now that our braces are cut, we are ready to cut out the sound hole and the outline of the guitar. As to the sound hole size, does the size matter? Yes. For right now, it's a good idea to stick pretty close to the size that your plan calls for. In the case of this OM, it's 98.5 millimeters in diameter. Many plans will call for a 100 millimeter sound hole. Most of those are going to be larger guitars, like a Dreadnought or a Grand Auditorium. I don't recall the jumbo off the top of my head, but somewhere around 3 7/8 to 4 inches is where most sound holes will end up. The OM calls for a 98.5 millimeter diameter sound hole. So that's what we're going to go with for right now. We could go a little bit one way or the other, but I'm going to stick with that because that's the way I have my rosette and purfling rings set up. There is a point where you can get too big or too small on the sound hole. If it's too big, the air that is moving back and forth can kind of wash out, and it could muddy your sound a little bit. Conversely, if the sound hole is too small, it could constrict and not be able to move back and forth, and it can constrict the sound and tighten up the sound that it produces, and it will likely not project very well. Again, for our purposes, we're going to stay at that 98.5. If you want to look at other options and take a look at those other theories about the sound hole size in relationship to the sound port and the volume of the guitar, you can drive yourself mad, knock yourself out, that's fine. But I don't want to get into that in this video. That's kind of a setup for an entire video series itself, and we are just not going to get into it. I am going to leave this right at that 98.5 millimeter diameter that we were talking about, which for me is going to be right there. And that is leaving about 2.5 millimeters from the edge of the purfling over to the edge of the sound hole. We really want at least 2 millimeters here, because if you start creeping closer and closer to this purfling, you are going to start degrading the structural integrity of the area around that sound hole. We just want a little bit more spruce right here than 1.5 millimeters. So 2's great, 3's better. You also have to balance the size of the sound hole. So hopefully we had done a good job of planning for that in designing, cutting, and laying in the rosette and purfling strips. All right, right there. We are not going to cut this sound hole out all in one swipe either. What we want to do is cut about halfway through, maybe slightly more on this side, and then we're going to flip it over and cut from the other side and finish out the hole. And we have much less cleanup and much less tear out than if we tried to go all the way through from this side. Plus we get to preserve our board that we're cutting it on. And again, we want to start and stop at the upper end of the sound hole, where hopefully our fretboard is going to cover a little bit of it. I'm going to raise this up. Oh, and I've already checked the depth of my bit. Make sure you do that before you start this, so that you're just about halfway through the top material. Just a quick check. Yeah. It's going to be right at 98.5. A couple things. I am using a fairly large downcut bit. That will allow me to take a little bigger cut, but be careful. Again, we are cutting in a channel that will not have anywhere for that to escape. So it's going to heat up. We need to go slow, and we need to make sure that our bit isn't clanking around and being forced in and out of those grains, because they'll pop and your sound hole will get a little bit zigzaggy in and out of those grains. That's exactly where I want to be, at 98.5. And I've still got 2.5 millimeters between the edge of the purfling strip and the sound hole. So I'm exactly where I want. Now I'm going to flip this over and cut the other side. Make sure we didn't suck anything in. Get this cleaned off. Starting in the upper bout. Now I'm going to start this with the bit suspended above the guitar top. I'm going to start it up and then drop it down. There we go. Now that I've got the sound hole cut out, I am going to use this as kind of a data keeping piece. Just to write the date, a couple of the specs on it that are going to be difficult to measure or remember. If this suddenly becomes some sort of a masterpiece, or even just a great sounding guitar, I have some sort of reference to it. Just a couple of notes on here. So these things are good to keep for reference for later, and not something you need to throw away. Just marking the center line of the guitar on the top and the bottom. There are a few different ways that you can get the outline of the guitar onto your top. I'm going to use this commercially available outline, acrylic outline. I've made my own, which I think I showed before, for a couple of other custom sizes. You can take your plans, you can get an extra plan and cut that out and mark holes through it. And you can take your guitar form and set that down on it. If you have your measurements, I am going to bump this right up against the sound hole, which is exactly the same size. That's good. Can mark my outline on it. And while I'm at it, I may as well mark my bracing. I don't have to realign this later. Some of these I may not use exactly, but they are still a good reference point. This template already has all of the braces marked onto it. You don't need to draw a real heavy line on it and put an indent in the top. I'm just trying to trace these circles lightly. All braces are marked, the outline is marked. Now I'm ready to cut this out. I'm going to cut this out on the bandsaw, and when I do that, I want to leave 3/8 to a 1/2 inch on the outline all the way around. The one exception is on the top here. I do want to try and get this as close as I can to this. That will make things easier when I line it up on the top, when we attach the top, so that we can get this as close as possible to that line that we've already marked on the heel block. Let's cut this thing out. We now have our braces cut, at least the width and the height. We'll get to cutting the lengths once we start laying everything out onto the top. We have our sound hole cut, we have the guitar outline cut, and most of our braces, if not all of those, marked out here. So we're ready to go on to laying out our bracing pattern and starting to glue these on. And we'll get to that in the next video. We'll see you then.